Good morning, and welcome to the Museum of the San Ramon Valley's virtual speaker series. I am Dan Dunn, the director of the museum. Last month, we learned the history and present and future of the Mount Diablo Beacon from one of the Beacon boys themselves. Today, we hear of the personal history of Pleasanton, as told to the editor by some 35 families that are represented in Donna Camp Million's book, Cruising Down Memory Lane, Stories of Pleasanton in the 50s. The book lives up to its afterword, which in part reads, quote, "Tell your stories before it's too late. Momentous, mundane, matters not. Pass on the stories or else they'll be lost. Pass on the stories with love." End quote. Donna's family is one of the families represented in this book. She has served as director and executive director of 4 educational foundations and a hospice. She has authored a book of fundraising strategies and conducted fundraising seminars across the country. She still lives on the land that her great-grandparents farmed over a century ago. Please use the chat window at the bottom of the screen for any questions that you have. Feel free to send in questions at any time during this presentation, and we'll address them at the end. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome in Donna Camp Million. Donna?
Hello, everyone. Let's see. Well, I think I'm on. I'll start. Hello, everyone. My name is Donna Camp McMillian, and I'm so honored to be one of the speakers today. And thanks for tuning in. This is different than when I usually do presentations because I can't see you. I can't see your smiles or anything. So I hope you will enjoy these fun stories. And first of all, I want to thank the museum, board of directors, staff, Dan and the other staff, and the volunteers. Of course, they're so important to recognize for hosting this virtual talk today. So he told me, Dan talked a little bit about my experience, but at one point during this time, these different jobs, I took a break between nonprofit jobs and co-authored a book on fundraising with a well-known author, and it became for a while Amazon's #1 book on fundraising. Then my co-author, Betty Stallings, who's nationally known for her expertise, she and I went after the book to 30 cities, training thousands of nonprofits in 30 cities on the subject of fundraising. But then 911 happened, and I had a new baby granddaughter, and I didn't want to be flying so much. So then we took a break. So for this project, though, I have been given several titles. We've laughed. Self-publisher, which I was, managing editor, godmother, and etc. Actually, after retiring, I wanted to have just one more challenging job. And not a job, but a project, which had a lot of meaning to me. But this time, I wanted to be a volunteer. I have always really been so happy with all the hundreds of volunteers I've worked with. And this time I was able to be a volunteer. The local bookstore owner, Judy Ditter Wheeler, she was one of my volunteers at one of the education funds. She knew me. She knew that my family had been here, one side of the family, since the 1800s. And I had written a book. She sold a lot of them on fundraising. And she said, Donna, I get so many requests. Like, what was it like in the olden days? And Judy said, they don't want book on facts. They want stories. We already have books with facts. So, and because, back in the 50s or a long time ago, all of our families knew each other. So anyway, and I said, well, okay, I think I'll do that. But I want to interview 70-year-olds, 80-year-olds, and 90-year-olds whose families made a living in the 1950s. And it was because I didn't want to lose these stories. They were just so amazing. It takes you back in time and makes you smile. And definitely before these stories were lost. And sadly, we've already lost four in a period of time. So, but we have their stories, and that's makes the families very happy, and me too. So I didn't want to do this, like I said, as a commercial venture, but I wanted to have the proceeds go to a worthy cause. That also not just me, but the storytellers would want, because we worked as a group. So I was lucky. The president of the Three Valleys Community Foundation, he was a friend, very good friend of one of the people I interviewed. And we talked, and I told him some of the stories. He laughed, and then he said, "Oh, this has got to be under our umbrella." And I thought, this is what I wanted. I wanted to have, a nonprofit standing, but under an umbrella, and didn't want to set one up. And so everything was volunteer driven. 50 people helped me. So it's not just my project, it's all of ours. And our only cost was the printing. And people then, even without me reaching out to them, they came to me because they knew that I did have that one cost. So it was a 3-year project of recruiting, and I recruited 38 storytellers. The museum was instrumental in videoing them, and then they were able to increase their, their stories in their archives. And then we wanted to have the stories written up from the videos. And I want to tell you now, this is Pleasanton, based on Pleasanton folks. But some of these people have roots in Livermore, Dublin, Danville, and I'm going to tell you a fun story about a man in San Ramon. So we were all connected. It wasn't just the Tri-Valley, it was really the valley at large. So then I found out, hey, I'm not a fourth generation Pleasantonian. A genealogical person that's head of the Genealogical Society, he on his own did my connections with Robert Livermore, the founder of Livermore, and that was a hoot. And so there, I guess I'm a seventh generation Valley person. And that was fun to hear. So when our population had a community of 2,000, just like Danville, San Ramon, everyone knew everyone, like I said, and that was the case for my family. And but you know what? I wanted a well-rounded group of storytellers in those days, and there were farmers, there were dairy farmers, ranchers, small business people, politicians. And I also wanted to capture these wonderful families who harvested and helped the farmers and ranchers. So I was really happy with the group that I got. But I realized this was getting bigger and bigger. I already interviewed 38 people, and I knew I couldn't do all the writing. So one of my friends, his name is Wayne Schatz. He's a top physicist and administrator. He's retired, of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. He heard about the project, and he said, Donna, he said, quote, "The best writer I've ever had in my career is Lauren DeVore. You need to meet her." Now I knew, Wayne was very precise, and he was, a scientist. And I thought, well, okay, so she wrote for him. How would it be for her writing stories? Then I met her. Okay, well, I was so excited because, I heard all about her background, but she told me her favorite job was ghost writing for Edward Teller, the very, very famous Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb. Now, if I could see all of your faces, I would say, raise your hand if you had heard of Edward Teller. And kind of when we've talked to younger people, panels, they don't know who that is. See how important stories are to be read. So she lit up when she when she talked about this, because he was Hungarian. He had a temper, evidently, but is also very loving and outgoing. And she captured his personality and wrote, not, of course, his scientific papers, but his correspondence. And that's what she loved because it involved creativity. And she obviously was also very creative. And then she also told her coworker, who was also retired then, Dan Saponi. And Dan, yeah, he was a scientific writer, but he's written nonprofit books. And I mean, excuse me, nonfiction books and also fiction. Oh my gosh, was I excited. I thought these are professional people. They definitely wanted to volunteer, and they just thought it was a really fun idea to capture stories. In the end, there were 50 volunteers involved. And our only cost, like I said, for the 400-page large book was the printing. Okay, so do you want to turn, please, to the next panel? Next photo. I don't see it. Um, okay. So these are the people that were involved. And the first photo was a photo of the painting of Debbie Wardrobe. She is the top seller for downtown paintings. And she said, I said, so is it okay if we use your and what would you need? And nothing. I love the idea. She said, yes, you can use it on all ad materials. And I just thought it was a beautiful watercolor. Okay, and then here's the pictures of the people involved. This last one is Kitty. Kitty also worked at the lab and was retired, and she had worked there for many years and became one of the top designers and illustrators. And she was on board, and she was from Livermore and Dublin and Pleasanton. So great, great person. Okay, the next photo, please. Okay, now I'm going to tell you first one fun, but it's a very small world story. This is a picture of my dad. He went he was a fourth generation farmer person, but he went into the military when he knew that World War II was going to start. And so he was really a gutsy man, and he became a fighter pilot. And he ended up winning or being given 4 distinguished flying crosses. And he didn't really talk about it. But he did say one story that I'll never forget. Okay, so my dad was shot down by enemy fire from the island of Okinawa when he was flying around there. And so he was shot down and he landed on the bottom of the ocean, but it wasn't real deep because it was pretty close, I guess, to the island. And his cockpit broke, and he was flying a Wildcat, and he was able to get through the cockpit and come up to the surface, but he got cut while he was doing that. So he was bleeding. And then he came to the top, and the Japanese knew he was down and he could come up, so they were shooting at him. So he swam as fast as he could away from the island into the Pacific Ocean. And he swam and swam, and a destroyer knew he was down. And so they came close to him when he was swimming out, and they threw a metal net down on this huge destroyer. And he was supposed to hold on to it and climb up, but he couldn't because he was so cut up and had been bleeding, etc. So the seaman quickly not ran, but he went down the net, or the metal net, and he grabbed onto my dad and he brought him up to the top of the destroyer, and he looked at him and he goes, Bud Camp. Okay, my dad was called Bud a lot of times. My dad played for Amador football games, and this man he had played against, and he played for San Ramon High. And see, Pleasanton people connected to the San Ramon people. And he also had dated my dad's sister, and he saved him out in the middle of the Pacific. And to the right here is the article that was in the newspaper about it. Okay, so then if you would give us the next, yes. Okay, so my dad was a rancher and a farmer. He didn't believe in putting all eggs in one basket. And that's what he always talked about. So he had 800 head of cattle, or we had 800 head of cattle. I was one of three girls. So I was expected to do things like he's doing right there, roping, and then my husband is branding. And this was near Doherty Road. So we had property, a lot of it was leased, but we owned property on Doherty and Tassajara, but we also had cattle in Orinda Hills, in Sunol, and Dublin, like I said, and then in also, let me see, what was the other? Oh, Mare Island. And so anyway, we were all connected, and we ran cattle from the old ranch road on Doherty. We'd herd the cattle. We'd take them out on the road on an early Sunday morning. We'd put some riders in front, and we would push the cattle down Doherty Road and all the way over to a piece of property on Tassajara, which I guess is now Blackhawk. So anyway, and it was fun to do that. And there were cars that came by, and we moved the cattle over to the side. And sometimes, especially the yearlings, they would see an opening in a neighbor's fence, and they would run way out. And then my dad would yell, "Donna, go get them." And I'd have to run my horse around the calf and then walk it carefully back to the rest of the herd. So yes, can you imagine running cattle down Doherty over to Tassajara now? Okay, the next slide, please. Now, like I said, in regards to some of my relatives in Danville, where this is broadcasted, my grandfather's brother, Louis Camp, had a dairy farm where Blackhawk is. So the museum has some of that information. Okay, this man is Walt McLeod. Walt obviously is a policeman, but in the 50s, he was the police chief. And again, boy, things were different then. And he wasn't sure he wanted me to interview him, but his wife encouraged him, and I had interviewed her too, because she was one of the harvesting families that were so crucial for all the farmers and ranchers. But anyway, Walt did come. He came into the museum he's over 6 feet with a big smile. He's 90 in his 90s. And he looked ready to go to be interviewed. He had notes, so he was really wanting to be interviewed. And boy, do those 90-year-olds open up. So let me tell you his fun story. He said, Donna, in the 50s, he said there were 12 bars on Main Street, and they served liquor and wine until 2 a.m. And boy, did that keep my officers and I busy. And of course, they were also responsible for the Alameda County Fairgrounds. And he said, we arrested a lot of drunks at a certain point. And then we would take them and put them in the jail, which was about 2 blocks off of Main Street. And he talked about how he loved his jail because it was the state of the art, Anyway, he put them in their cells. He would take their bottles away. He'd put the bottles in a safe container inside the jails, lock it, and then he said, I'd come really early in the morning, and then he would pull this big lever down, the cells would open, he said, but darn, he said, they were shaking when they walked out. So he said, and they were kind of our steady clientele in the jail. And he said, so we had empathy for them. We cared about them. And so we gave them, before they left, because they were shaking, a shot of wine or liquor before they left. Now, can you even imagine that happening now? But that was in the 1950s. and it was in a small community town. Okay, please go to the next one. Okay, now, I wish you could raise your hands and I could see you. This man that I interviewed, his name is Rich Guasco, and the subtitle is From the Wrecking Yard to Life in the Fast Lane. And it certainly was true for him. He's also close to 90. So, anyway, I don't know how many of you recognize his name, but I'm going to tell you his story. He grew up with his family in a small house in the middle of a wrecking yard. And he told me, Donna, you know, farmers were most of our clients, and they were so tight with a buck. I had a $10 part, and they would pay $5. And he laughed. His mother was a good cook, and she operated a 4 to 5 stool restaurant. And they also had a tow truck. And here's the tow truck from the 1950s. And, you know, their property was right on the freeway then. It was called Highway 50, but now is 580. So I'll tell you a couple of stories about this. The Highway Patrol, of course, knew about the Guascos because they used to stop and, you know, eat food at Rich Guasco's mother's place. And so what they did was they had a tall flagpole, and it was right near Highway 50, very visible. And if the officer had to call to the main office, they put a CHP flag on the top of the flagpole because he said, you know, they didn't have radios then. So imagine that. Then he ended up loving hot rods and cars, and he knew how to put them all together. And he put together in the auto shop, see, Amador, and I'm sure San Ramon, I don't think Monte Vista was, I don't know when Monte Vista started, and Walnut Creek, they had a lot of times auto shops. They were very, very popular. People wanted to know how to fix their cars. Well, he ended up building a beautiful purple hot rod, and it was awarded, because it was in a show, America's Most Beautiful Roadster. Then he got into racing, but that did not last long, as he was severely injured in a race. His family had to hawk everything in order to pay for his 1-year stay in the hospital because of his huge injuries in this crash. So you want to turn to the next photo, please. Okay, this is what he built. He designed it while he had to stay in the hospital. He just kept his mind on racing and roadsters and everything. It is a very famous roadster. It is called Pure Hell. And this roadster became so famous that it even went to England so they could see it and hear it and watch it, but it also went to Australia. And so anyway, he had to stop racing, but he, you know, had a driver. So they did a lot of racing and have won a lot of awards. So anyway, he belongs to 3 Hall of Fames for a roadster, and has taken his purebred, like I said, to Europe and Australia. And he told me that it's been a good ride. That's what he said. And like I said, he's just hanging on there. So he just keeps wanting to live life, even though he's battled a lot of health issues. Okay, the next slide, please. The next slide, please. Oh dear. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to just talk. Okay, there. Okay, this is the family. This is the man and woman who were the publishers of the Pleasanton Times. And it was a revered newspaper. Everybody couldn't wait to get it. and it was a weekly. And I interviewed Patty, and Patty was the daughter. She was the stepdaughter of John Edmonds, and she was the daughter of his wife. And that was, anyway. So Patty said she worked the front desk, started fairly young. It was really a family affair, but then it did expand. She said, Donna, quote, a local newspaper was like a precursor to Google then. The calls that we would get, people would call in and they'd ask, hey, how do you spell Eiffel Tower? Or what are the seven wonders of the world? So we had to keep a dictionary and an encyclopedia right by the phone because people called all day long. Everyone in Pleasanton know where to call to get the information. And if someone was having an argument, they'd call and say, hey, would you help us settle an argument, please? Always off the wall things. And Patty said she was always looking up things in the encyclopedia and the dictionary, but it was so much fun. And so many people, it was kind of the place where everybody wanted to mingle too, she said. So there were a lot of people that would come in. And her father was the writer, he was the publisher, and Patty said, and he always had lots of newspapers because he would also deliver them to different parts of Pleasanton, like they have now. And he also then would hurry up and get it to the post office to be mailed. So he was a really jack of all trades and evidently a very kind, very intelligent man. And his wife had long roots in the area, so she would get some stories and tell her husband about who to interview. So it was really a family affair. Lovely people. Okay, the next one, please. Okay, now this is a story about Jim Georges, and it's looking back on Carefree days, and the story tells that. Now, how old would you say these boys are? I've asked a few people. My daughter's a teacher. It looks like they're fourth grade, maybe fifth at the oldest. But look what the last two boys on the right are holding. Okay, so Jim Georges is the guy on the far right. And he talked about, I guess they didn't have money to buy bikes, and that's all they did was ride bikes. He did not want to play sports, he said. So he felt he was different because all he wanted to do was go out in nature and hunt. And so he would, because they would put bikes together, he talked about one gentleman who owned a bike repair shop, and the man was so generous to these young boys, he would let them go in and get the parts that they needed and never had to pay, he said, that he could remember. So he talked about, he lived above Main Street, and he said, I'd ride my bike down to Main Street on my bicycle with a .22 rifle. And that's how old he was. Look how old he was. And he put his rifle across his handlebars. And he used to go into a very fun, popular hardware store called Colin's Hardware Store. And he said, I'd lay my rifle against the wall inside the door. And I'd buy a box of cartridges from Mr. Colin. And as I remember, it was like 35, 40 cents. I'd put them in my pocket. I'd put the rifle back on my handlebars and I'd ride down to the creek or into the hills way up there and do some hunting. He said, I spent most of my time outdoors. That's where most of us were, outside running around. And all of them talked about that. All these storytellers talked about how they were always outside. They weren't looking at the computer. So next, please. Okay, this is a great story too. And it's kind of hard picking these stories, but this is one of the stories about a woman who spent almost all of her spare time watching the horses run around the racetrack. And her name was Melanie McDonald, and she really was a trailblazer in the world of horse racing. So her father quit school at 11 years old, and somehow she knew she should get an education. And she ended up getting a college education and a master's, and she became a teacher. But she really did not feel that she was making as much of a difference as she wanted to with her students. So she would just hang around the racetracks on her spare time. She got to know the people that had the horses, and they knew how much she loved them. So she started, her first job was, she said, quote, walking hotties. Walking hotties is walking a horse after it's run a lot, either in practice or in a real race. But it was during practice that after practice, she would do this. And then she did more and more as time went on. And she also taught, but she so missed, she wanted to spend all of her time at the racetrack with these horses. Even though she had her master's and she still had more years to get a pension, she quit. And with her money, she bought her first racehorse. Well, she is in her late 80s, and I want to show you the picture of her. So would you go to the next slide, please? I love this picture. This is the woman that went from being a teacher, she had a lot of education. She quit it all without a pension. And she said somebody would sometimes give her a sandwich. And she worked her way up, and she became one of the first racehorse trainers. And it was very unusual for a woman to pass this test. And she said she was never more nervous in her life to take this test. And she only got one wrong. Anyway, I want to read you part of her story about what it was like to be one of the first horse trainers as a woman. Okay, quote, in those days, there were a lot of rules and regulations that were placed on women, but not on the fellows. In fact, when they gave me my trainer's license, this is what I was told. I was not allowed to saddle my own horse. My racehorse has to be in the saddling paddock, and I have to have a gentleman do it because it's inappropriate behavior for a lady. But it was my responsibility as a trainer, though, to make sure the horse was saddled correctly. And then she talked about it with me, like, the person on the horse can die in a race, if the saddle comes undone. So she felt it was a really big responsibility to make sure it was done. But when she came to the saddling paddock, even though she couldn't saddle the horse, she was told she had to be appropriately dressed, which meant I had to wear a dress, I had to wear nylons, I had to wear heels, wear makeup, get my hair done. She said the whole 40 yards. And after the horse ran, she ran back to, the barn. She kicked off her heels. She put on a pair of extra large coveralls and got to work on the horse after its race. But she said it did ease up in the 70s, but that's what she experienced. And I visited her the last 2 summers when she was racing her horses. And last year, I believe she had 4 that was racing. And I want to show you a picture of one of them that came in. So those are 2 of her horses in the paddock. And this is the one that we took a picture of that was running at the end. Beautiful, beautiful horse. And she studied a lot of kinesiology at the university, and she learned about that. And she also coached, and she was a runner herself. So it really helped, she said, being a horse trainer. So, okay, the next slide. Now, before I end, I want to read something that one of the storytellers said. This woman, her name is Francine King. I'm sorry, I know her as Francine King, but her married name is Francine Rivers. Now, raise your hand if you know that name. She has sold, her husband said, 20 million books. She's been on the New York Times best-selling list a lot. And her books have been turned into 20 languages. So she's very well known. And this is what she said at the end of the interview that I had with her. She said, quote, looking back on my Pleasanton childhood, I feel blessed growing up here, where and when I did. It was a special time. I think we all knew it, but we didn't really appreciate it then. Many of us left because we thought there was nothing happening in Pleasanton. We had to go out to the big wide world of adventure and opportunity. Then we spent, though, the rest of our lives as we got older looking for another Pleasanton. And what did we find? That there aren't any towns like Pleasanton was in the 50s. Not anymore. And so we cherish our memories all the more. So I thought that was a good way to end this. And they are all special. And I really encourage all of you to consider how maybe you could do something like this. Maybe not to this extent, but there was so many gratifications. There was basically 5 wins. One, the storyteller got her story told. The families were so happy. The museum got all of the oral histories in their archives. And then all of these folks knew me and they gave me black and whites that represented their stories. Um, and then, we went under the umbrella of the foundation. And then we've already given out 12,000 to the nationally recognized journalism program in the local high school here. And that's what everyone that I interviewed wanted because they all graduated from that high school. But I really wanted to make sure it is a lot of work. We're still continuing. And we only have like 35 books left from 2 printings in a little over a year and a half. So Judy was right. People really want to hear stories. Okay.
Thanks, Donna. Sorry, folks, I had a tough time getting my video back on. So, Donna, thank you. It's a great book. And what I can say and back up what Donna had said a little bit, it's not only the stories that are here, but it's filled with black and white photographs so that you can sort of go along with what you're reading with about these families. Donna, I was interested in, I'm from the East Coast, so I'm not from Pleasanton, but I was amazed at the diversity of the people that are represented in your book. You have
Yeah.
people from the Philippines that are here. You have people from Mexico that are here. You have people from Eastern Europe. Your family's from Scandinavia, I believe. There's all kinds of different backgrounds, and it was interesting to me that they all found a niche in Pleasanton and managed to fill it.
Very well said, Dan. um, yes, that was a challenge, but it wasn't really hard because I knew of the families. The biggest challenge was I knew from the beginning, we already have a 400-page book. And I see people downtown, and I've heard some frustrations like, gee, why didn't I get interviewed? But my key person that helped me decide who to interview was a gal that she passed away, but she graduated in the 50s. Her father was a mayor. She knew everyone too. And so, when I wanted a small business person, I would run it by her. And I tried to get the oldest person I could. Like I knew some 70-year-olds whose family, had a business, but I wanted to get as many 80-year-olds as I could. So,
I thought the other thing that was interesting, a lot of us have grown up in small towns, me included. Um, and I guess if you're of a certain age, you'll remember this, but the idea that the local shopkeeper who's represented in your book would put things on a tab for people so that
Yeah,
he knew they didn't have the money to pay for it, but
yeah.
we'll put it on a tab. The idea of the police department driving people home after they've had too much to drink. It was very interesting, and it really took me back to being in a small town.
Yeah,
Um, and so those were some of the things that I got from this
yeah,
wonderful book. Can you talk about that kind of small town mentality? And
yeah.
we would put that in a negative way today, but I
Uh-huh.
think that small town mentality really came through with
Yeah,
the people that would go out of their way to help other people.
yeah. It was the warmth. And one of the people I interviewed was a dairyman's son. And his father and grandfather were big dairymen. And it was called the Orloff Dairy. Well, this man, he said, he told me he had a beautiful talk at one of our panels. He got up and said, I could not have become the district attorney if I had not felt the warmth and the help and just the feeling that I got. He said I was so shy. And if you see the picture of him in the book with his grandfather and father, and he really wanted those pictures in, you'll know he was shy. And I remember that. And then he said, then I was going to be maybe an attorney in Pleasanton, but I got into working in the district attorney's office. And he said that was exciting. But I could not have done that if I hadn't grown up in Pleasanton and felt the warmth of people. It gave him confidence, as a shy person. He knew people cared about him, and it gave him more and more confidence. His story is wonderful, and he ended up being rewarded by Janet Reno and even Arnold. So it was a very warm thing. But see, I didn't want just to have the person that became the district attorney, but I wanted the Macias family in there. And when I interviewed Ray Kalia, I called him. I used to ride the school bus with him because I lived out, on the farm. And I said, Ray, we really want your family story. And he was a retired Marine and tough guy, nice guy. And he broke down a little bit. The fact that his father's story was going to be in the book. And then I realized, oh my gosh, this is such an important project. It better be good.
So let's get into the process a little bit.
Yeah.
What were some of your challenges with the project that I know this from talking to you before that took 3 years to be pulled together?
Yeah. Okay. The biggest project, everyone said yes. I mean, I kind of had to talk a few people into being interviewed because they didn't think they had a story. And so I said, okay, let's talk about your day, and then they realized that they had a story. But when Lauren and Dan wrote this as first person, it was a casual conversation. So we did not have any colons, semicolons. It was not as if we were writing about the family. It was as if they're talking to the reader. Well, I interviewed about 4 teachers that were teachers. And so I gave them the rough draft to look at. And then they called me up and said, Donna, no, wait, there should be colon here, or there should be another paragraph here. And then I had to explain to them, this is a different project. This book is a casual conversation. And then I had to take each of their stories that were finalized to them after a few corrections, and they had to sign off on them. And if you see at the end of every story, I have their signature.
Yep.
So, and so that was, but it was fun, but I had to talk, and I kind of work with a few of them.
So it was interesting when you were talking about, this really tough guy that started to tear up a little bit.
Yeah.
Did you, was that fairly common with people that didn't think they had a story, but when you sort of pushed the right buttons, they had not only a story, but a good one?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I interviewed Anita Macias. Anita Macias um, married the Walt McLeod, who was the police chief, and her family worked in the crops. I used to walk home and, they were, harvesting the crops, and I got to know them, and their families were really good athletes, and everybody liked them. Anyway, so when I called her, she said, "Oh, Donna," she says, "I don't really have a story." And I said, "Okay, Anita, now, see, I knew her. Okay, Anita, now tell me about your typical day during harvest season." And she proceeded to tell me. And I said, "Now, wait a minute, Anita. People need to hear this. How hard you worked.
Yeah.
And because of you, the farmer made money, your family." And she goes, "Oh, okay." And so then she says, "But Walt really is nervous about you interviewing him." And I said, "Just have him come and sit by you." And that's, see, when he thought about it, made notes, and he walked in and he wanted to go first before his wife to be interviewed. So it was really fun working with these people. But everybody was very excited. Like I said, the biggest challenge was meeting someone on Main Street, and we
Yeah.
didn't get their story.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of a sensitive person. I was worried about that.
But obviously you had the trust of these folks because a lot of these are really personal stories.
Yeah.
Some of them came through some pretty hard times,
Yeah.
and yet you were able to capture their tales.
Well, when I interviewed Tom Orloff, he gave me a nice compliment because I was worried interviewing him because he's been interviewed so many times. I mean, he tried Huey Newton, yeah, twice. So he was in the news all the time, and he's been interviewed and all that. And so I thought, oh, I better do a good job. So he came in and I interviewed him, and he just kept talking and talking and telling me. He told me a story too that's in the book, and I was surprised he told me. And afterwards, he says, "Donna, it didn't feel like an interview. It just felt like we were sitting
Yeah.
on a couch talking." And I tried to make it that way because I
Yeah.
really am interested.
Your stories actually come through like that. It's almost like
Uh-huh.
you're sitting at somebody's kitchen table listening.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me about the high school journalism class.
Okay. Well, I've been in the nonprofit world, and it's very important when you make a lot of money, raise a lot of money or whatever, you want it to be used very well. I mean, I felt very responsible for that, and I always have in my career. And so it was suggested to me actually by Francine Rivers. "Hey, Donna, what about considering the journalism class?" I went through it. A lot of kids do it. And I thought, well, I don't know how it's run, and I better go see. Well, let me tell you, the woman that runs it, the whole class is nationally recognized. They go to big conferences, and they told me they wanted to do more newsletters, paper newsletters, and put them out, along with the local newspapers. But they had a hard time raising that much money. And then they also needed some more equipment. And it was a very professional. I mean, it was amazing. The kids were so engaged. They weren't looking down, they were looking at you. And I thought, this is a good place to put it.
Good, good. So speaking of that, where can we get the book?
Well, the book can be sent to you and without postage charged if you go to Town Center Bookstore, and they have one in Pleasanton and one in Livermore. And that's the lady who convinced me that they want stories. And so she carries it. So, and then all the proceeds, they'll go to the foundation. So Town Center Books on Main Street in Pleasanton. And you just call them up, and it's very easy.
Good, good, good. And that's about all we have time for, Donna. I'd love to talk to you for a lot longer.
I know, it's been
But
fun.
it has been fun.
But
So
Dan, you need to do this. You need to get a volunteer to do this. Danville has history. Teasing you.
yeah, I'm a better host than author, I'm afraid. So thanks for coming on this morning. Thanks for sharing this great book for us.
Sure.
And I had a blast with the book. I had a blast talking to you this morning and yesterday or the day before. So thank you very much. And thank you all for viewing this morning. If you missed any of our earlier programs, you can find them by visiting the museum's website at museumsrv.org. Donna's program will appear early next week. So join us on November 21st at 11:30. It's actually kind of book month here at the Museum of the San Ramon Valley. We have author Dan Handel's book, which dwells into the fascinating history behind his historical novels, this is one of them. They're based on Contra Costa places. Dan's stories of hidden treasures, mystic symbols tied to ancient Greece, and the world's largest winery will delight readers, whether you are a fan of historical fiction or curious about the past. This one's a good Halloween book. It is the Mount Diablo Cemetery, which I think a lot of people know about. And that's all I'm going to give away at this point. So that will be next month, 11:30, November 21st. If you like these programs and want them to continue, we ask that you make a donation by going to the museum's homepage, museumsrv.org, and clicking on the Donate Now button. Donna's background in fundraising knows how we do this, so that's true. We're also in need of volunteers, so if you can give us some time, please contact the museum. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. I've certainly enjoyed it, spending time with Donna. So stay safe, and thank you all for watching. Bye-bye.